Hello, this is BBC News with me, Ben Brown. We're going to be looking for you at tomorrow's newspapers in just a moment. First, though, our latest BBC News headlines. And Labour's Deputy Leader Tom Watson says now is not the time for a leadership contest, but warns the party must do better winning over voters. President Trump announces he will not be attending the annual White House Correspondents' Dinner this year. One man has died and 2 other people have been injured after a man drove a car into pedestrians in the German city of Heidelberg. 3 men have appeared in court on slavery charges after the discovery of a cannabis factory at a disused nuclear bunker in Wiltshire.
It's terrorism. We'll take it.
And coming up after the papers, we'll be getting Jason Solomon's take on Patriots Day, the Hollywood blockbuster based on the Boston Marathon bombing. That's in the film review. Well, welcome to our look ahead at what is in the papers tomorrow morning. With me in the studio, Caroline Wheeler, political editor of the Sunday Express, and Anne Ashworth, assistant editor at the Times. Welcome to you both. Thanks for coming in. Now, let's just take you through the front pages that have arrived with us so far tonight. Sunday Telegraph have got an interview with the new independent reviewer of terrorism legislation. That's Max Hill, who's warning that the threat of terror attacks is now at its highest since the 1970s. In the Sunday Times, changes to visa regulations for migrants is the lead story. The paper says plans include limiting access to benefits for new arrivals in the UK. And the Sunday Express has more details about the man who murdered the children's author Helen Bailey. So let's kick off then with the Telegraph and the story about Brexit, the Lords uniting potentially to soften Brexit. That'll cause consternation among some people, won't it?
Yes, of course it will. I mean, it seems like this has been going on for ages now, all these debates around Brexit, and we still haven't yet triggered Article 50, which is, of course, the kind of formal mechanism by which we leave the European Union. The bill, the withdrawal from the European Union bill, has already gone through the House of Commons. It went through unamended, and it's now making its passage through the House of Lords, where, of course, the relationship is slightly different, and the arrangements around patronage, MPs being frightened that they'll get sort of voted out if they don't sort of follow the will of the people, as it were, and the result on the 23rd of June doesn't quite apply to the House of Lords. So, of course, they're a little bit freer to tinker with the legislation as it goes through, and they have put through a raft of amendments, one of which concerns the rights of Europeans already here, and one which is about having a vote on the entire deal once we get there. And these are the things that the Telegraph is telling us there will be some cross-party support for as they try and sort of have their influence over the bill.
They are freer to tinker, Anne, but at the same time they have to be a little bit careful, don't they? Because this was a referendum with a majority, a huge exercise in democracy. The House of Commons passed the bill without amendment or change.
You might say that they have to be careful, but I don't think they're minded to be. They are almost becoming like an opposition party. They are the awkward squad in this, and they're going to be asking questions about migrants' rights, about the very fine detail of exactly under what terms we exit. And I think it will be a very, very interesting process. Because
but is that democratic? They're not elected.
They are there to review legislation, are they not? And they see that as being difficult in this crucial piece of legislation. They see that as their role.
But whether they have any great success really with this is still very much up for debate. There'll be this process of ping pong where basically they'll revise and amend legislation. It will have to then be passed again by MPs who will obviously then reject it as they did beforehand. And of course the whole intrigue around this is it's going to affect the timing of triggering Article 50, because in essence we've got to get this bill passed by the time we trigger Article 50. It had been suggested that would be done as early as March the 9th, which isn't that far away. The suggestion is now it will be pushed later, possibly towards March the 15th, March the 16th, 17th.
You wonder what Theresa May will think about all that. She was, of course, in the debate at the beginning in the Lords, looking looking at all the peers as they were debating it. And also Gina Miller, now the businesswoman in the Independent front page. She is pictured there. And the Independent, well, they're saying that Gina Miller says that the Lords need to show backbone on the Brexit bill. Gina Miller was the woman who, of course, brought the original legal case, which then went to the Supreme Court, that said that Parliament had to debate this and pass this legislation.
An extraordinary woman in her own way, who has put herself into the limelight and received a torrent of abuse over her questioning of Brexit. And she has once more emerged to say that the Lords must do their job. She sees it very much as their role to be the irritant in this process. And you know, she is a Marmite person. People are very, very divided about her, but I know quite a few investors who really admire her for all her campaigning on the amount we pay for pensions and stock market funds, that she's done a great deal to expose.
Yeah, she's had death threats as...
Well, she has.
And been vilified on social media.
Yes, I mean, as have actually, you know, people on both sides of the debate. I mean, you know, Nigel Farage also complains of similar treatment, says he can't go to the pub anymore because he gets, you know, a torrent of abuse when he goes out. But she is an interesting figure because, you know, like her or loathe her, it takes an enormous amount of courage, I think, on an issue as divisive as the one we've just seen in terms of the referendum, to actually then take up the mantle and actually take this to the High Court. And then, of course, the government even, you know, took it back to the High Court after she'd taken it originally. So, you know, a great deal of courage from her. I mean, in many ways, what she's saying here, we would expect her to say. I mean, she's going to want the Lords to try and soften Brexit as she sees it. And it's interesting as well that she sees that the Prime Minister, particularly her turning up, as you say, in the House of Lords, she sees her as being a bit of a bully, somehow breathing down their necks. Yeah. And she's saying that you should stand up to them.
It's going to be an increasingly divisive issue as the spring unfolds.
Quick look at the Sunday Times, Anne, because they've got yet another angle on the whole Brexit story, and about benefits for migrants and a visa revolution for foreign workers.
Interesting story that we're just seeing trade deals going on the sidelines. What we're talking about is the rights of migrants, both of those who might come in the future and those who are already here, as to what basis they will come in. But we think this is most interesting for a very interesting date. Is the cut-off date at which you can stay here if you're a EU migrant the date of the referendum, or is it the date on which we trigger Article 50? And I think that's going to be a cause of huge dispute to come.
And
but
this particular article is suggesting that the lawyers have looked at this, and what they're actually saying is it will be the date that we trigger Article 50 rather than the date we
Which could be a couple of weeks away.
Yeah.
Which, yes, exactly. So much still to be determined.
if everything goes well in the Lords.
Exactly.
Now, another story in the Sunday Times is about the Labour Party, which we've obviously been discussing since the fallout from the two by-elections. You know, did OK in Stoke and lost in Copeland. And Tom Watson, the deputy leader, suggesting they could face a wipeout in England, as they have done in Scotland.
Well, yes, the analysis, if you look at the level of the swing that we saw in Copeland, would see, you know, scores of Labour seats very much under threat from the Conservatives, who will naturally be pouring their resources in there. It was interesting to see how Theresa May discussed the idea of the Conservative Party now being the Workers' Party. So, you know, the Conservatives are very much trying to sort of park their tanks on Labour's lawn. And I think this is a major concern to those within the party at the moment, particularly the moderates, who don't actually see any way out of this kind of abyss that they've sunk into. There is no kind of white knight charging to their rescue that anybody can see. You know, names like Dan Jarvis get thrown about and bandied around, but nobody actually really thinks that any candidate other than another from the left will actually win out should there be another leadership contest.
Is David Miliband going to enter the fray?
Well,
because
yes.
Very big comments in my paper this morning about this is the darkest time he's seen for Labour, and he sees it impossible.
Or will Tony Blair come back? I mean, that's another one who's been sort of around the fringes making sort of these major speeches.
You think the
They will
party
come back to rescue the party.
But would the party elect David Miliband?
Well, it would depend. I mean, the interesting thing about this is the reason that they want Corbyn, of course, to hang around for as long as possible is that there is this rule change that they want to instigate in September, which is known as the John McDonnell rule, which will mean that they don't have to reach such a high threshold in order to get another left-winger onto the ballot paper.
Quick word, you've got a story in the Express.
Yes.
We're slightly running out of time, so you'll have to sum it up very quickly about UKIP.
Yes, exactly. So there were two by-elections. The fallout from Labour is one story, the fallout and the UKIP is the other. Paul Nuttall obviously didn't win the seat of Stoke, and basically Aaron Banks, who is the party's biggest donor, is going to issue an ultimatum to Paul Nuttall and say, make me chairman, let me modernise the party so we can become electable. And if you don't do that, I'll set up a rival party that will basically destroy UKIP. It's
because
a real...
he set up a rival kind of blog.
Yeah.
But would he actually like to be Prime Minister, Aaron Banks? Does he see himself as the leader of UKIP? I think that all your story...
We'll ask him that on another day.
Yeah.
Anne, Sunday Telegraph, this is the story we mentioned earlier on, the terrorism chief, as they call him, talking about the threat of terror, the worst for a generation.
It is an extraordinary story, this. Max Hill, who is the new independent reviewer of terrorism legislation, the man who keeps an eye on the people who keep us safe. And he is saying that the terror threat is at its worst since the 1970s. Now, you might expect him to say that he has a serious job and a great deal to do, but it is a very, very sobering tale, this. However, there's lots of stuff that they don't seem to have asked him in this story. I would have wanted to, one of the things I would have liked to have heard from him in this interview is what about all the ISIS fighters that have returned to Britain, the people who are radicalised and have returned. There's around about 400 of them. Is he going to be keeping a special eye on them? Does he want new measures, new surveillance techniques?
Well, it's interesting you should say that, because I mean, one of the things I was saying to you before is that actually the reason terror's back on the agenda is because of the release, the death of the Guantanamo Bay detainee who'd gone out and blew himself up in the suicide bomb in Iraq. And of course, I would have wanted him to talk more about sort of surveillance and what we're doing to make sure that people don't slip out of the country when they have been, of course, for concern. But from your point there, the thing that alarms me slightly is actually he talks about reviewing terrorism prevention and investigation measures, which are TPIMs, which are the most draconian, although not as draconian as the control orders, because he thinks that they are an extraordinarily serious infringement on freedom. I mean, he seems to be of the ilk that he's actually going to go the other way and actually look at the civil liberties angle rather than actually looking at the angle of these people posing a grave threat to us and what we can do to keep us safe.
Very quick look at the Sunday Telegraph again, and it's the Oscars tomorrow, and La La Land being tipped to sweep the board, really. A picture of Emma Stone there, hot favourite to be named Best Actress. Now, Anne, you went to see it and you didn't like it.
I didn't like it, but I think the interest is going to be in what sort of level of virtue signalling we see from the stars, how many impassioned anti-Trump speeches that we hear. Now, usually I can get really, really focused on the frocks. That's what really interests me. But I'll just be wondering just how beautifully choreographed and scripted all these impassioned, seemingly off-the-cuff speeches are. But no, I didn't enjoy La La Land, but it is a Hollywood film. It's a...
Caroline, there'll be frocks and politics tomorrow?
There will be frocks and politics. We've seen a bit of that already. I think there was some protests today with the likes of Michael J. Fox and Jodie Kidd making speeches about Trump. I think that will be a feature of the Oscars tomorrow. Like you said, I'm probably going to be looking at the frocks. Don't get to go to the movies very often, so...
I don't think you haven't seen anything for ages, have you?
No. Very disappointing. As I said, this is the best night out I've had in ages.
Caroline and Anne, thank you very much indeed. That is it from the papers. And coming up next, it's time for the film review.